Good evening, respected senior doctors and dear colleagues. Today we are holding the monthly meeting of API Kochi. We have slightly deviated from the usual practice. We have been conducting it always on the last Friday of the month. But this particular month, last Friday, falls on the Christmas Eve, and all of us would like to be with our friends and family on Christmas Eve. That's why it has been preponed. Second reason is that today is the Indian Physicians Day. So this is the best time to have an academic session and interact among ourselves. So that's why we chose today as API's monthly meet day. For today's sessions, we had two parts. First is an academic part. Dr. Joe Joseph from Lizzie Hart Institute is a consultant in interventional cardiology. He'll be talking on VT storm and its management with a caveat case. And second part, we will be honoring a senior physician of repute among us in Kochi, Dr. P. Ramakrishnan. That was the second part of our meet today. So may I request Dr. Rafiq Muhammad to please come over and take over the first session. Dr. Joe Joseph may also kindly occupy the dais.
Good evening to all. Dr. Radhakrishnan, Dr. Sheetal, Dr. Prasanna Kumar, thank you so much for giving me the chair. Good evening to all my friends and our chief guest, Dr. Joe Joseph. I think this is the last meeting of API Cochin this for the year. I think we have been having a tumultuous year throughout. In between we had online sessions, then we had hybrid, and now I think we have a few people here. I'm sure it will fill up. So I would like to introduce Dr. Joe Joseph, who's going to talk to us on something on wires. He's a cardiologist from the Lizzie cardiology family. There's a huge number of people there, which is an extremely busy place. As a consultant in interventional cardiology, interventional cardiologists have more than 5 years experience in and an expert in coronary and non-coronary interventions. He is an expert in primary angioplasties, bifurcations, angioplasties, coronary imaging, and is actively involved in the adult structural interventions like device closure of ASD, VSD, PDA. He's also trained in complex non-coronary interventions like EVAR, TIVAR, device closures of ventricle septal defects, ruptures, and paravalvular leaks. He is in charge of the heart transplant program in Lizzie Institute and involved in all aspects of heart transplantation process. He has got one of the largest experience in endomyocardial biopsies in transplant hearts. He is in charge of aortic intervention program in Lizzie Institute and as specialized in TAVR, EVAR, and TIVAR. He takes care of the adult anticoagulation clinic at Lizzie Heart Institute in the Department of Cardiology. So over to Dr. Joe, who's going to tell us so much about wires and interventions. Over to Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, APA, for this wonderful evening as well as for the opportunity. And thank you, Dr. Rafiq sir, for these kind words of introduction, and Dr. Prasanna Kumar for this wonderful opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to speak in API, and I would call in a way it's always a gar vapasi to me. Thank you. So I'll be talking about a case based discussion on one of the most important aspects in what a complication seen in our day-to-day practice. I would call this session as a how when the wires go haywire, how to manage the pandemonium. So this is a very common story, a story of a 49-year-old male, a diabetic, and he claims that he got a good functional capacity, and he says he told me that he plays 3 to 4 games of badminton without any symptoms. But he developed chest pain after playing badminton in the morning, and ECG was showing a anti-wall MI. And today also we saw the tragic death of a young doctor with after playing badminton. I am not a great fan of this form of sport. So he was taken to the hospital with a cath lab facility and immediately taken for a primary angioplasty. And the angioplasty was reported as a double vessel disease. And the interventionist thought that he did the balloon, he wired and did a plain old balloon angioplasty to the left anterior descending artery as well as the first diagonal branch. And after wiring and after opening up the artery, he thought that no, this patient is better with a surgery, and he stopped the procedure after establishing the flow to the coronary arteries. And after some time, the patient was discharged, and patient went home. But the patient wants the surgery to get the surgery done by the best surgeon in the town. The problem was the surgeon was on leave for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later he was seen by the surgeon, and the surgeon showed by the time all the damage has occurred. So echo showed a large regional wall motion abnormalities and moderate to severe LV dysfunction. And the decision by the surgeon was for a PTC. The surgeon thought that it is too risky to undergo a CEBG, and most likely the patient needs only a angioplasty, and so he sent the patient to me for an angioplasty. And this is the left anterior descending artery. The left anterior descending artery got a large long segment disease in this aspect, and followed by a good sized diagonal. And this is the ostium of the diagonal, and the ostium of the diagonal got some disease. And it's always a straightforward angioplasty, and we placed a long stent, and subsequently it was stented, and there was good amount of flow to the myocardium. And I thought that the diagonal is, even though the diagonal is a big vessel, but it's not wise to do an complex angioplasty like a bifurcation stenting, especially in the presence of a severe LV dysfunction. And most of this area of myocardium was totally damaged, and there is no point in doing a very complex interventional procedure in this patient. That was my idea. So I just did a angioplasty to the LAD. This is the stent going to the LAD, and I got a very good, reasonably good flow. And there was a simple lesion in the RC also, and that was subsequently angioplasty. It's a straightforward, not a very complex angioplasty, relatively straightforward angioplasty. So it is a straightforward problem. The problem all started after that, and he started to throw ventricular arrhythmias. And this is the strip which shows that initially it was a VPC. It was a VPCs. Subsequently, it couplets, Frank VT and VF. It was a pandemonium. It's a pandemonium, and you can see the strips. It is all sorts of arrhythmias, ventricular arrhythmias. Starting from this is only a few VPCs, then subsequently becomes couplets. Again couplets, throwing into a ventricular tachycardia, and towards the end, all the morphology changed, and the patient develops a frank ventricular fibrillation. And it was ventricular fibrillation was going on. So what is this? This is what is typically called as the electrical storm, or the ventricular VT storm, ventricular tachycardia storm. So what is electrical storm? This is commonly accepted definition is that if you got the occurrence of a more than 3 ventricular arrhythmias, ventricular VT or VF within 24 hours. And most of these patients, some of these patients will have a ICD, that is in implantable cardioverter defibrillator. It may occur in patients with ICD and without ICDs, and they present with a wide variety of symptoms. Sometimes, depending upon the clinical presentation, they may present with a related to low cardiac output, like heart failure, syncope, cardiac arrest. And if the patient got ICDs, they will present with therapy is related to the ICDs. It can be either anti-tachycardia pacing or shocks. And studies have found that this affects around 15 to 20% of patients with ICDs. Is it a benign one or a malignant one? Definitely it's a bad thing. And all of the studies also very clearly shows that when you have an electrical storm, it is associated with a high mortality. And the mortality is something to the tune of around 2.4-fold in patients with unclustered sustained ventricular arrhythmia. So if you got a unclustered, sustained, even it is not clustered, that is some ventricular arrhythmias which is occurring once in a while, and compared to an electrical storm, they got around 2.5 fold increase in mortality, and it is around 3.3 fold compared with patients with no sustained ventricular arrhythmias. So studies has very clearly shown that it is associated with a high mortality, whatever may be the definition you apply for electrical storm. So it can occur in all type of, it is usually occurs in patients with structural heart diseases. Most commonly it is ischemic cardiomyopathies or subsequent or in non-ischemic cardiomyopathies. And it is also associated with inherited channelopathy. There are some inherited channelopathies like the Brugada syndrome or a long QT syndrome or a catecholinergic polymorphic VT. These are inherent congenital channelopathies, and these patients may most likely associated with may need a ICD, or most of these patients will be on ICDs, and in this type of patients also you can have electrical storm. The worst combination is these two. The worst prognosis when you got a ejection fraction which is less than severely LV dysfunction and associated with a QRS duration more than 120 milliseconds. So when you have an electrical substrate as well as a myocardial substrate, that denotes a very bad prognosis in these patients. So why some patients develop electrical storm? These are the triggers for the electrical storm, and they found that majority don't have any triggers. These are the identifiable triggers. Especially it is precipitated in a myocardial infarction, acute myocardial infarction, electrolyte imbalance in the form of hyperkalemia, hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia. Then worsening of heart failure, sepsis, and obviously with poor compliance with antiarrhythmic medications. And another important thing is this bradycardia. Most of these people are very happy with the bradycardia because most of the cornerstone of therapy is beta blockers, and most of these patients will be having a bradycardia, and the bradycardia induced Torsades-de Pointes is a often overlooked entity, and this usually culminates in a ventricular electrical storm also. And studies have very clearly found that there is a increased the autonomic nervous system plays a very, very important role, and there is enhanced autonomic stimulation. There is loss of protective vagal reflexes, and the imbalance between the sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic activity. These are the usual triggers which leads to an electrical storm. How do these patients present with? It depends upon whether the patients got an ICD or non-ICD, because a patient with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, non-ischemic cardiomyopathy with severe LV dysfunction is a candidate for an ICD, and some of these patients will be on ICD. So if there is not an ICD, it is if the patient is not on an ICD, it is by the hemodynamic significance of the ventricular arrhythmia. Hemodynamically significant VT or a VF will present with a cardiac arrest, obviously present with a syncope or a cardiac arrest. And when you have some patients may be on antiarrhythmic drugs, so VT will have a longer cycle length. That means the VT will be not very fast VT, it's a slow VT, and this will cause palpitations, low cardiac output symptoms like giddiness, lightheadedness, chest pain, heart failure or near syncope. And if the patient is very slow VT, then patient may not be aware may not be aware of the rate at which it is occurring. That is called as incessant slow VT, and incessant slow VT may result in present with symptoms of heart failure. And if the patient is got an ICD, and the most common thing is ICD. The work of ICD is to give appropriate therapy. There are two forms of therapy in an ICD. That is whether it terminates by two methods. One is by antitachycardia pacing, and other is by shocks. So if the patient got an electrical storm, the machine will deliver either it will continue to deliver the with the pacing, antitachycardic pacing, and this patient present with a recurrent antitachycardia pacing. And if the patient has got shocks, it is this machine will automatically give large amount of shocks, and some shocks may be insignificant, some patient may not be aware, some may be very dreadful to the patient also. But whatever sudden it's a medical emergency, and it needs to, the hemodynamic status of the patient has to be addressed, And another important thing is the prevention of recurrent ICD shocks. When there is a VT, the the ICD will automatically give shocks, and that is the prevention of the recurrent shocks is the most important consideration if the patient got a ICD. And search for the correction of the potential triggers, like if there is an electrolyte abnormalities, you have to correct that. If there is ongoing ischemia, you have to correct that. If there is worsening of heart failure, the heart failure has to be corrected. And it is followed by pharmacological treatment, device programming, and then it is, as I told, it is the basically significant changes in the autonomic nervous system imbalance is there. So you have options for neuraxial modulation, deep sedation, and finally catheter ablation. So these are the basically 4 cornerstone in the management of a VT storm. That is one is by ICD reprogramming. You got an ICD, you have to reprogram the ICD or switch off the ICD. There is antiarrhythmic drugs, and there is sedation, autonomic modulation, and finally catheter ablation. So management, patients with an ICD often present with multiple ICD shocks, and these shocks are distressing, increase the anxiety, and leads to sympathetic overactivation, which further promote and sustain ventricular arrhythmias. And recurrent shocks has been associated with increased mortality. From multiple studies has very clearly shown that if the patient with an ICD got a recurrent shocks, it is associated with not only with mortality, and it is morbidity as well as significant anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I got a patient, one of my patients who admitted when I was in All India Institute of Medical Science. There was a patient who got a recurrent ICD shocks, and because of the shocks, he committed suicide by jumping from the top floor of the institute. By committed suicide. So ICD shocks are not it's not small things. It's significantly not associated with mortality as well as with morbidity. So when you got an ICD, you immediately interrogate the device. By interrogating the device, we know that what is the type of arrhythmia which is going on, how it is, whether it is a polymorphic VT or a monomorphic VT or a VF, and we will see clearly able to identify the initiation of the ventricular arrhythmias, maybe whether it is associated with a pauses, whether it is associated with a bradycardia, whether it is associated with a couplet. So we can know the mode of initiation of the ventricular arrhythmias, and we will definitely able to identify inappropriate shocks. And if it is hemodynamically tolerated, then ICD detection should be immediately turned off to prevent recurrent ICD shocks, and so that the physician will have a manual control over the mode of therapy. So that's the most important thing when you got an ICD in these patients. Immediately interrogate the device, switch off the device, and take control of this thing. So the drug therapy is by, I told it is basically the sympathetic overactivation. The cornerstone is beta blockers, because sympathetic nervous system activation is central to the development, not only to the development, but also to the maintenance of electrical storm. And it is basically a both selective as well as the non-selective beta blockade is found to be beneficial, and mortality is significantly lower in sympathetic beta blockade compared to antiarrhythmic medications. So and that is why studies have found that beta blockers are the cornerstone of management of these patients. And non-selective beta blocker is better than selective beta blockers, and initially studies are for the propranolol. And down-regulation of beta blockers and up-regulation of beta-2, down-regulation of beta-1 block receptors and up-regulation of beta-2 blockers in heart failure may explain the clinical superiority of propranolol to this in this situation. So non-selective beta blocker is better than selective beta blocker. And this is a very important study. It's called the OPTIC study, where they enrolled around 412 patients, and the endpoint was to look at the number of shocks, more than 10 shocks per year, and found that beta blocker monotherapy is associated with the 7.4%. When you combine with the beta blockers amiodarone, it's around 1.4%. When you go to another class 3 antiarrhythmic, that is sotalol, it is around 2.3%. So beta blocker and amiodarone is a very good combination in this type of patients. The problem with sotalol is a very good antiarrhythmic. The problem is that in patients with severe LV dysfunction, most of these patients will be of patients with severe LV dysfunction. There is an increased proarrhythmic risk with sotalol. So sotalol is not a very preferred mode of therapy in this type of patients. And most common drug is the lidocaine and mexaretin. The lidocaine and mexaretin both belongs to the same category. And lidocaine is very effective in terminating ventricular arrhythmias associated with ongoing myocardial ischemia. But when you got a scar VT or it's an established myocardial infarction or a healed myocardial infarction, lidocaine is not at all very good effective. And mexaretin, the oral mexaretin is right now available, but there is limited data both for as well as against the use of mexaretin, and it's not a very good drug. So how I dealt with my patient Mr. BM, and he underwent recurrent cardioversion. At least over the 3-4 days he must have received around 30 to 40 shocks, recurrent cardioversions, xylocard infusion, amiodarone infusion. But this is again after all these things. He continues to have it to be in ventricular fibrillation in spite of all these measures. So the next option is to have a deeply sedate this patient, deep sedation. And overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system contribute to the maintenance of electrical system. And one of the best ways is to sedate the patient. If not, the patient is not getting sedated, paralyze the patient and intubate the patient. So sedation with the propofol as the main sedative agent, and with a concomitant infusion of other agents like fentanyl, so that that will take care of the sympathetic nervous system activation. And following deep sedation and intubation, we can plan the definitive management, whether we go for further treatment like a medical management, whether you go for ablation, cervical sympathectomy, or coronary artery bypass grafting to control the ongoing ischemia. Again, coming back to my patient, and he was deep sedation. There is no need for paralyzing the patient or intubating the patient, but he was deeply sedated for 2 days with propofol as well as fentanyl, and obviously the ventricular arrhythmias recurrences reduced, not completely aborted. So after that, the next option is the patient is not getting control. Again, the next option is to undergo catheter ablation, and there are various ways to ablate the patient. You can ablate the VPCs. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, you can locate the location of the ventricular tachycardia, and you can ablate that area. Or if it is a scar-related VT, you can create multiple points, multiple exit blocks, so that the tachycardia circuit will not perpetuate. And the problem with catheter ablation is that it has got very good success rate in patients with ischemic cardiomyopathy, and if the patient is having a monomorphic VT. And because polymorphic VT, the problem is that the circuits may be from different parts of the myocardium. We may not be able to identify the circuit. So in ischemic cardiomyopathy, it is associated with a higher rate of recurrence of ventricular arrhythmias. And because some part may be normal, some part may be electrically active, the other part may be electrically inactive. So patchy arrhythmic substrate will be there, and it is less likely to be approached endocardially. Almost most of these VT is ablated endocardially. And the problem is some of the non-ischemic cardiomyopathy VTs is that their entrance and exit points are from the endocardium, so not from the epicardium. And some of these patients has to be approached epicardially, and the success rate of a epicardial ablation is very less, and moreover it is also a very risky procedure, because if the patient has got a large amount of pericardial effusion, you can go directly and poke the pericardial area and go endocardially. But in a patient with no pericardial effusion, it is very difficult to identify the pericardial space and ablate epicardially. And my patient also underwent a catheter ablation, and these are multiple catheters going into this is the catheter in the ascending aorta. These are multiple catheters going into the left ventricle and identify the focus. So this patient underwent catheter ablation. And subsequently, another interesting area of the therapy is the autonomic modulation. There are multiple ways where you can modulate the autonomic neuraxis. That is either by thoracic epidural anesthesia, or by left or bilateral surgical cardiac sympathetic denervation. And usually it is done by percutaneous stellate ganglion blockade, where it is also done at the bedside to reduce the cardiac sympathetic activity, or using fluoroscopy or ultrasound guided a transcutaneous injection of a long acting local anesthetic is performed in the region of the stellate ganglion. And stellate ganglion, multiple studies have found that stellate ganglionectomy by local anesthetic is a very good choice to reduce the electrical storm. And some of these patients can also undergo a surgical cardiac sympathetic denervation, that where you can permanently interrupt the sympathetic cardiac nervous stimulation, and that is done by the video assisted thoracoscopy, and it involves the resection of the lower half of the stellate ganglion and second to the fourth paravertebral ganglia, blocking both the efferent as well as the afferent cardiac nerve transmission. So this is how we do the permanent surgical cardiac sympathetic denervation. And finally, if there is no other options, some of these patients may have to be put on ECMO. And ECMO remains an option in managing intractable ES, typically as a bridge to definitive treatment. So you will get some time to assess what is to be done for this patient. ECMO improves the myocardial perfusion, obviously by improving the myocardial perfusion, and decreases the end diastolic pressures in the left ventricle, and as a result help to maintain and restore the sinus rhythm. And newer studies have found that even electron beam radiotherapy has also emerged as a treatment for recurrent ventricular arrhythmic storms, especially when there is no other options are available, and if the patient is too failed to undergo an ablation procedure. And finally, in spite of all these things, my patient underwent a ICD, because we cannot predict the recurrence of an ICD in these patients, ventricular tachycardia in these patients. So this patient he got a class 1 indication for an ICD because he got a very severely affected left ventricle, and he underwent an ICD, and after 2 months he is still on follow-up and doing good. So this is the last few slides. Treatment algorithm, it all depends upon whether the patient is hemodynamically or stable or not. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, look whether the patient got an ICD or not. If there is ICD, you turn off the ICD and look for the triggers and all those things. And subsequently, beta blockers is the most common, most commonly used drug is the beta blocker. And look for reversible causes and triggers, treat the triggers. And if there is significant ongoing arrhythmias, you got multiple other options like beta blockers plus amiodarone, deep sedation, catheter ablation, neuraxial modulation, ECMO, ventricular assist devices, and finally transplantation. So my taking points will be is early recognition of electrical storm is very important, and referral to a tertiary electrophysiology center is mandatory. And electrical it's not an easy task, because you have to have the intensivist, you have to have got the cardiac surgeon, sometimes the cardiac surgeon, sometimes you may need the interventional radiologist for percutaneous stellate ganglionectomy. And increased activation of a sympathetic nervous system is critical in initiation and maintenance of the electrical storm. And the problem is that it is usually it represents the advanced part of a natural history of the cardiac disease, and it's a predictor of almost a underlying deterioration of the underlying disease. And we should try to eliminate the trigger and modify the substrate of the ventricular arrhythmias. And it is a very complex treatment process, consists of administration of antiarrhythmic drugs, suppression of the sympathetic tone. If the patient has got any device, you have to be reprogrammed, and finally catheter ablation. And antiarrhythmic things are, the drugs has to be chosen individually, taking into account not only the efficacy but also increased risk of proarrhythmia and other side effects. And electrical storm is a critical condition. Even after successful ablation, patient continues to bear an increased risk of morbidity and mortality. Thank you so much.
Dr. Joe, for a wonderful exposition on arrhythmias and what you do there in the theatre. I invite any questions from the floor.
One point, you mentioned that this patient got triple vessel disease, right? And his ejection fraction was very low, well below 30%, and he's diabetic. Isn't such a patient a candidate for CABG?
No, sir, it does not depend upon if the patient got a diabetic triple vessel disease. It also depends upon that particular combination, whether it is if the patient is very amenable to an angioplasty, because he needs only 2 stents, very long, short stents, good sized vessel. I would send him for a CABG if the patient got a triple vessel disease, and he got basically a double vessel disease, not a triple vessel disease. And if I need a large number of stents, if my stent size are very small, if there is diffusely diseased vessels, and if there has got lesions in the landing zone as well as in the landing zone where there is a high chance of a restenosis, I would definitely send this patient for a CABG. So in this patient, I don't have any of these risk factors. Small stents, very good diameter vessels. So I got a no significant disease at the landing zones of my stents. So the chance of restenosis is also low. So I think, and it is already seen by the surgeon, and the surgeon himself thought that he is better to do with a stenting rather than a CABG. So you should look into not only the clinical situation, but also you should think of the anatomy of the vessels. I think this is a very reasonable anatomy for a PCI.
But wasn't the stent very long in the lady?
It's a long stent, pretty long stent, but not a very, very long stent. And the RCA stent is normal, and the LAD, both the inflow as well as the outflow part is normal, and it is a very large stent. It's something around 3 to 3.5 millimeter stents. That's a very reasonable stent.
And secondly, you said this patient's got broad QRS complex, about 120, 140 millimeters.
No, this patient does not have any broad QRS. It was a normal QRS actually.
So there's no role of CRT in this?
No role of CRT.
And when we do an RF ablation, do you do a ventricular CARTO in these cases?
This patient was not underwent a 3D mapping. It was a plain normal routine RFA, not by a 3D mapping. If there is a multiple VPCs, and in these patients we were not planning for an ideal ablation. Our aim is only to ablate the circuit which is causing the problem. There may be multiple number of circuits, but our aim is to treat the circuit which is causing the problem. That is why reason we specifically taught for not under routine RFA, not under 3D ablation, 3D mapping.
And lastly, is the patient still on beta blockers and amiodarone?
He is not on amiodarone. He is on amiodarone, but it's not a very high dose of amiodarone. He is on 100 milligram OD and is on a stiff dose of beta blocker.
Propranolol, is it?
No, we don't usually, even though studies have found that propranolol is goodful, but our this thing is basically for coronary disease. We still use metoprolol. He's on metoprolol.
Thank you. It's a nice talk.
As per the current literature, is there a definite criteria to say this patient had electrical storm? This patient had electrical storm. Is there any definite criteria?
Yes. Definition of electrical storm is when you have recurrent episodes of ventricular arrhythmias, that is more than 3 episodes within 24 hours. That is the classical criteria right now. And this patient got significant amount of ventricular tachycardia. You have to be shocked multiple times within the 24 hours. So.
Now, the other thing is, when you mentioned the recurrent attacks, was it a ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation?
It's just ventricular tachycardia. It's ventricular tachycardia.
But the patient was hemodynamically stable.
Stable.
But because I remember you saying that the patient's ejection fraction was very poor and poor LV function. But
yes.
In spite of that,
he was tolerated, because initially he had ventricular tachycardias and ventricular fibrillation, but subsequently with the drug therapy, the recurrence rate is reduced, even though it was not completely gone.
He never required any vasoconstrictors.
No, he didn't require vasoconstrictors.
Regarding the RF treatment, you told that you have not isolated the circuit. So how did you?
There are maybe multiple circuits in the left ventricle, but the problem is that our aim in such a hemodynamically stable patients is to reduce the number of circuits, and so that the rest can be taken care by the ICD as well as the medicines. So we isolated a single circuit, which is predominantly the reason for this morphology. There are multiple morphologies of VPs, but this one VT was very predominant. So we isolated that isolated that area, and that cleared majority of his ventricular tachycardia as well as the VPCs,
So even-
because that was the predominant circuit which is creating problems.
So even then, he is still at risk for further.
Absolutely. That is the reason we put an ICD.
Okay. So, but suppose like you mentioned before, if patient has recurrent VT, again recurrent shocks, then what is the next alternative?
Recurrent shocks, if there is patient got recurrent shocks, we have to look whether the patient is getting shocks appropriately or inappropriately. Some of the shocks may be inappropriate, and studies have found that something around to the tune of around 15 to 20% of the shocks are inappropriate, because some may be oversensing the arrhythmias. Some may be like atrial fibrillation. The Gaussian patient is got an atrial arrhythmias, and the ventricular lead will be over this thing, and then she shocks. Whether we have to look for whether it's an appropriate shock or an inappropriate shocks. If it is inappropriate shocks, we have to look for the etiology why there is inappropriate shocks, and we have to reprogram the device. If the patient has got recurrent shocks in spite of this ICD, that are true shocks, needed shocks, then we have to think of other options like escalating the medical therapy.
That's what my last question. What about newer agents to prevent VT? Or are we still at the old drugs?
Absolutely, because the problem is that most of these patients will be got LV dysfunction, and these patients with some newer drugs like Mexaretin, even it can be given, but the problem is there is no 100% safety. Sotalol, if the patient does not have any structural heart disease, Sotalol is a very good drug. On the other hand, it cannot be given in patients like this with severe LV dysfunction. So basically it comes to the age-old drug of beta blockers as well as amiodarone.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? Doctor, such people with such poor LV dysfunction, how about TMR? My God.
No, but TMR is not, as of now the recommendation is transmyocardial revascularization. It is as per the recommendation, right, it's a class 3 indication right now. Nobody does TMR right now.
If there are no more questions, I think we'll thank Dr. Joe for having enlightened us on this topic.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Dr. Rafiq, for conducting this session. In fact, I forgot to mention about Dr. Rafiq himself because he's too familiar to all of us. But there are a few outstanding achievements. Firstly, he is the current RSDI secretary of Kerala chapter. And under his stewardship, the Kerala team has won the championship in the All India quiz competition on diabetes. And secondly, of course, he has been academically very, very active. He is always present in all the API sessions as well as RSSDI sessions. And he's got a very long-standing experience as a physician, right from 1987, if I am not wrong. Yeah, that's pretty long experience indeed. Thank you, Dr. Rafiq. Now, may I request our Vice Chairman, Dr. Prasanna Kumar, to please come over to the dais and take over.
Good evening, friends. Now the second part of this session starts. And as today it's a Physicians' Day, today we are honoring a senior physician from Ernakulam. And for that, to start the program, I invite... before that, I request Dr. Radhakrishnan to give memento to Dr. Mohammad Rafiq, who had chaired the session. Please. I invite Dr. Joy. I invite Dr. Radhakrishnan again to please present memento to Dr. Joy.